We do have a little bit of time for a panel discussion. And we have Will Chen from United Electric Controls joining us, and Malik Patel from Dow. And Malik, I think you want to say a couple of words about modular approach to software design. Okay, we can just start the panel. I do have some questions here, but given the time constraints that we have, I would like to take questions from the audience, and I'm sure we have questions from people, even though it's the end of the day. And we have some ARC people that are going to walk around with microphones, so don't be shy. And we have a gentleman right here in the middle here with a question. If you don't, we have a microphone. If you don't mind just identifying yourself briefly before your question.
Vince Calandra with Wind River. I happened to live through the aerospace and DoD transformation during the F-22 project when modularization came about and there was standardization, etc. So IEEE was all over that, and there was 1,000 standing committees, and of course all of the appropriate suppliers were on those committees. What, forgive my naivete, what are the standards committees that will be driving everything that I heard today in the multiple presentations?
Anybody want to go first with that?
Yeah, okay, so at a minimum, if we're going to replicate the success I think that the avionics industry had in that transformation, we will need some similar consortium, something that's very similar to the FACE consortium, where we bring together all of the buyers and all of the sellers. And I think one really clever thing that they did, by the way, is they were able to establish the business case before they sat down to write one technical specification. I think as an industry, we've fared very poorly at developing standards. I think there has to be a better way to do it. So FACE employed an independent nonprofit to help set up the agency, make sure that everyone understood they're going to get a piece of the prize, and then start working on the standard. So at a minimum, I think that's the right place to start. But I need to speak to my new friend here as well, because I think there's some collaboration we ought to talk about with Europe.
Well, actually, talking about automation, I would say it's IEC. Automation ML now is a standard. But for instance, it's mandatory if you want to set up a plant for Daimler, for instance, you need to provide an automation ML for virtual commissioning. And actually, I think that's the way to go. Use standards that already have a lobby and that already have proven use cases. Don't reinvent standards for automation itself. I think that's the way to go, and there are lots of really interesting standards out there.
Greg, would you care to comment on that? I know you've dealt with standards in this process of developing these new wireless devices.
I guess I could speak from wireless perspective. I guess the key committees that we initially worked with are under ISA, the S100 committees, and for some safety applications that I was involved in, again back with ISA, and it was SP84 committees were the ones that were key to us.
Did that answer your question? Okay. We have a question right back here.
Michael Kraus, BSF. I have a short question on the Exxon vision. Do you think that this leaves room and space for also more intelligent devices where you would build on more computational capacity on a smaller size? Or is it orthogonal somehow to this approach that you would like to centralize and use the capacity which you have in server farms?
So I think if I understand the question correctly, what we were trying to do is at a minimum build an architecture that fit hand in glove with the existing analog field devices. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to take a look at that architecture and say, well, if I'm going to build a greenfields facility, why on earth am I buying an analog device and putting an I/O module in between? So one could imagine that there's opportunity for consolidation between the field device and what we call the DCN. For a new device that just doesn't exist today, that's purely digital, you might think of it as Fieldbus 2.0. Right. So, did I answer the question?
Yeah, basically, yes. So somehow the vision for me seems that, yeah, on the one hand, the consolidation of the field device, the DCN, and maybe even more.
Yes.
If you would also see this in this approach, or if you would somehow limit it to the field device plus the DCN and the rest within the collapsed L1 to L3 structure.
So I think the beauty of the architecture is we don't prescribe what can be innovated. If the standard is published, anyone working out of their garage can build a field device and try to sell it into the market. And it will interoperate.
And I was going to say that it makes it a little bit easier if it's a greenfield project. You know, we have done that for the Saudi JV, where we were able to actually introduce the service bus to get the integration, not only at the level 2 to and below, but also from the MES layer to the ERP layer as well. So you get the flexibility of the vertical integration and the horizontal integration within the MOM layer. It gives you tremendous flexibility. Some of the things that you talked about, like vendor independent, integration or using the standard adapters and things like that. It is difficult, however, to go back and retrofit some of that in your existing plants that are there. But the vision is there. I've seen progress being made in many, many different areas where, the layers are collapsing, the technology is getting better, and so I think that's the exciting part.
Will?
Yeah, I think as a field device supplier, I think I see a lot of opportunity because up until now, until Exxon started to present their vision, we were somewhat hamstrapped. We couldn't get above there. For example, there are devices now that actually can diagnose 100% of all of those things that absolutely could go wrong with that device. And so we're almost reaching that point, which means that all of the asset management stuff that is actually higher up in the enterprise is actually going to be pushed back down.
Right.
And so you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to send all of that data and then take all of that data and analyze and then tell someone to go do something in your EAM system. So I see it as a great opportunity.
So speaking as a somewhat veteran of the Fieldbus wars, I hate to call them the wars, but is there a place for Fieldbus in this vision, Steve?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I mean, it certainly
the
sounds
content of the field device, the protocol,
Yeah.
will have to change, but the content of the device, the application layers, clearly was in place.
Okay. We have several other questions. Who's first?
Yes.
I have many hands up here, right here in the back of the room.
Yes, Jeff Melrose, Yokogawa Corporation. My question is, given that open systems and secure systems may not necessarily be complementary under all circumstances, what is the panel's opinion on open systems impacting secure systems, and does device certification kind of come to the fore on that for security?
Did we get that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so I get asked that question a lot, and our management asks the question, isn't open mean not secure? And when I think about it, our level 3 MES layer is open, and I don't consider that to be a vulnerability. In fact, it's far closer to the internet than the control system is. So I think they're two separate principles, and I also think this is an opportunity to make sure we go back and integrate the intrinsic security all the way down to the microprocessor. When you're under attack, what do? You bring your perimeter into a smaller, more defensible area, and that's what we need to do. Bring those layers of security, and I truly believe that there is a way to create the openness and interoperability without sacrificing the security.
Well, I would like to put in another aspect. Why are we opening our systems? Because there's money in opening systems, and the business processes we can run with open systems. So actually what we need to do, we need to balance risks, security risks, and value propositions by opening our systems. And I think there's no way back to automation as an island and to security by obscurity. And if you just have a look into software development, you see that openness, putting your source into public, putting your protocols into public, having them certified by millions of programmers, that's a way to really address these risks. I don't just look which operating systems as of today are vulnerable, are most vulnerable, that are not the open systems. So there's those that really stem on security by obscurity.
Anybody else care to weigh in on that question?
Well, it needs to be dealt with, these forums heavily, I mean, we are talking about industrial Internet of Things and how we're going to enable that. The smart sensors with embedded processors, I mean, we are hooking it up. Of course, the key is to connect to that secure platform so we can get the information to the cloud that has applications, the databases, and your analytics engine. It's a concern that everybody has, but we're going to have to deal with it, and figure out by collaborating how best to do that. Because obviously we all understand the value of that smart decision making and quick decision making, not only at the level 2 level. I mean, we're talking about all the way to the enterprise level.
Good comments. One more, yes, plenty more questions.
I'm Tim Salisbury with LyondellBasell, and I may be asking the same question in a different way. I'm excited about the vision, but the idea of the level 4 business network connecting directly to the real-time service bus is literally terrifying. And the fact that you could potentially have the DCN modules from different manufacturers, how as an end user will we be able to be sure that we've dealt with all the potential vulnerabilities in those? And I see how it all comes back to the standards, but I'm curious if you've thought through how would you make sure that the real-time service bus is truly inherently secure? Is that still just a vision, or has there been some thought of how you would implement that?
Well, I think part of that answer will involve intrusion detection and prevention systems, I think. So the technologies that are able to monitor the network traffic, look for normal behavior, describe it in the form of a state machine, and say, look, I know the pattern of someone poking around looking on my system. I know the pattern of a man-in-the-middle attack. I know the pattern of a denial of service attack, and be able to shut things down. I don't know, it probably plays a role in it, but I couldn't tell you with confidence we have all the answers to these questions, because that is a reference architecture. And like I said, we may decide we're just not quite comfortable with that peer-to-peer relationship, and we may stack them back up again. We just can't help but say this feels like the right answer. If we can challenge ourselves to get past those security issues, it's far better than the architecture we have now that's quite vertical. So I'd love to talk to you later about it, but my instincts are to shoot for the stars.
And we have dealt with that. The best way to describe it is like the layer that you're talking about, which is of course is a big concern from the enterprise to the MES layer. It's calling it like a hybrid integration infrastructure. So not everything goes through the bus, if you will, because certain technologies or certain MOM system that you would have would automatically have the integration connectivity to the ERP layer. One of the great things about the service bus is that some of the capabilities, so the intrusion detection and retries on an error situations, those are built-in capabilities, and I think it makes it a lot easier to have that technology in place, and then you do the integration with the standard adapters versus trying to do something on your own, because I think there's different kinds of risks in doing something on your own as well. So it's something that you have to balance it, but I think the technology is getting better and better to have that integration. The other piece is that you do want to decouple some of the security concerns when you're building interfaces so that, if something goes wrong on your network, you're still running the plant floor and not impacting, the other operations versus the reporting, So that integration architecture, the systems architecture needs to take that into consideration of how you connect the layers together.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question. Yes.
Steve, you mentioned the idea of if someone wants to build a device in their garage, as long as it's compliant or whatever terminology you're going to use, go for it. I think a lot of the innovation we've seen, and we'll say just generically, say the mobile space, the internet space, is the cost of entry is effectively zero there. If you're great and you put out a good product, there's very low hurdles. Traditionally, especially on the hardware side and even the software side, those barriers to entry are enormous. Is your group, and are you all thinking about that from the beginning of how do you keep those barriers to entry as low as possible? That certainly possibly displaces a bunch of the incumbents. But is that part of your thought process, or do you just hope that maybe falls out through open standards and published protocols, things like that?
Well, it's certainly not to displace anyone, I can tell you that. We're trying to foster more innovation through an open marketplace. And I think the latter answer that you provided through the open interoperable interfaces is really our focus right now. And at the end of the day, we don't really know how much innovation will come out of this, but this is purely a strategic perspective that if you create this capability, people will come. So I don't know how to answer that any more detail than that, and I probably haven't gone into as much detail in the context of the way you asked that question. But we have been asked this, we have been asked this question, are we just building something and crossing our fingers and hoping somebody will come? And I think the answer to that is no. I think the people that are already innovating are going to say, I can now develop solutions that have different characteristics, that solve different problems, and work in different spaces.
Okay, we have one more question back here.
John Fryer, Stratus Technologies. So the success really of any initiative like this really depends on not just one company like ExxonMobil deciding that this is the right thing to do, but getting other companies who use automation systems in the industry to get on board with the initiative as well. So my question is, what is ExxonMobil doing to get other companies on board? And what is the reaction of the other companies up there to this initiative, and what would it take to get them on board with it?
Well, I can tell you that is exactly why we are here, to have that conversation with the user community. I'd love to hear the reaction, but this is exactly the kind of dialogue that we would like to start having today.
Good answer. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do just that here this week. Talk to some other user companies and try and get some more interest and some more cooperation. And I think even some of the people that were up here today maybe might foster some new cooperation. So do we have any other questions from the audience here? We are technically out of time.